In a nursery house, an old man was seen reminiscing his young days. He is Frank Sheeran. Back then, he worked as a delivery man for a slaughterhouse. For 8 years, he worked tirelessly without ever taking a single day off, but even so, he was underpaid and couldn't provide for his family. One day, his delivery truck was broken down near a gas station. He then met a middle-aged man who helped him with his problem. His name is Russell Bufalino. Frank was grateful to meet him and had him help his problem. After a brief introduction, Frank returned to his job. That night at a bar, Frank got to know a restaurant owner known for his call name Skinny Razor. Frank offered Skinny's steak for a low price, but he seemed to underestimate Frank. He then asked Frank to let him try his meat. The next day, Frank worked as usual. He asked for more meat to deliver, but the worker didn't seem to care for his request and instead gave him a seal for the truck door and asked Frank to put it before he left, but instead, Frank put the seal and left from there. On his way, he stopped by Skinny's restaurant and delivered some meat to him. After that, he then sealed the door and continued delivering the rest of the meat. This kept repeating. Frank even shared his income from Skinny with other employees. Skinny was satisfied with the quality of the meat and started ordering more from Frank. Frank, who was almost retired from his job, decided to deliver all the meat from the slaughterhouse right to Skinny. Knowing the truck was empty, Frank's boss was unhappy and sued Frank for stealing from him. Knowing that he was sued, Frank tried to find an attorney to help him in the trial. That was when he met William Bufalino. He claimed that he will defend his client, even though the client was guilty. William asked Frank's motives to steal all his boss's meat. Frank told him everything. He had been working without a single day off for 8 years, but his boss never gave him a raise. That simple confession was then used by William to fight Frank's boss in court. William handled the court so well, he even made the judge side with him and Frank and turned things around. The judge was mad at Frank's boss for suing Frank. He even threatened Frank's boss to never sue Frank again. Frank was judged as a good worker. After they won the trial, William took Frank to celebrate their win at Skinny's restaurant. That was when Frank found out that William was the cousin of a mobster, Russell Bufalino, the one that once helped him with his truck's problem. In that restaurant, there was also a mafia boss named Bruno. He was seen chatting with Skinny, but his eyes kept looking at Frank. After meeting Frank for the first time, Russell had been liking Frank's personality. Especially when he found out that Frank, who is an Irishman, could speak Italian. Frank said that he learned it during the war in Italy. Frank went to war for 4 years. He was a cruel man. During the war, he took 2 war prisoners to dig a hole in the ground without them knowing. They were digging their own graves. After they finished, Frank killed both of them. Russell, after quitting his job in the slaughterhouse, Frank started working for Russell. Russell had a small curtain shop as a cover for his real job as a mobster. Everyone who knows him respected him so much. He did many things to help other mafias with their problems. He could help take over businesses from someone, helped government workers get promotions, bribe judges for trials, resolve disputes between mafias, and even killed people. He was so respected even mafias had to get his permission to kill someone. Frank's relationship with Russell got closer. Even Russell started to believe him and made Frank his confidant. Frank started doing more important jobs for Russell, like asking for delayed payments from Russell's clients. Frank was not an aggressive type of guy, but rather a quiet and wise person. But when one day he found out his daughter was sad because she was pushed by a grocery store owner just because she dropped a shelf, made Frank furious. He then went to meet the store owner and beat him. He even broke the store owner's hand. Frank's closeness with Russell ended up making Russell the godfather of Frank's child. Frank started looking for additional work until he met a mafia who wants a laundromat to be destroyed because it interfered with his business. After receiving some payment from the mafia, Frank immediately did his job. When he was about to blow the place, Bruno, one of the most respected mafias in that area, found out about it. Turned out, he was one of the stakeholders of the laundromat. He was mad at Frank, but thankfully, Russell helped Frank out of his problem. To cover Bruno's loss, Frank had to work with him. It turned out that his job was to kill the person who gave him the order to destroy the laundromat. Since Frank's first job with Bruno, he became a regular killer who often received jobs. He often took orders to kill someone from Russell, but he never asked for money from him, because he did it as a tribute to Russell who had given him his job. Frank's life started to improve. He could provide for his family. He could take a day off and relax with his family. Russell was always there with him. Russell seemed to like Frank's children and treated them as his children, all because he couldn't have children. One day, Russell introduced Frank to Jimmy Hoffa, the head of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Jimmy was the most influential person after the President of America. At that time, the union had over 1 million members and they saved their pension funds there. Jimmy asked Frank to go to Chicago to settle a taxi driver's dispute. There, he met Salerno, Jimmy's colleague who runs everything there. Tony said they were competing with another taxi company and that made them lose their profit. Frank then helped to get rid of another company's taxis and brought back Salerno's taxi company to its glory days. After successfully snatching all the competitors' business, Salerno told every single detail of the plan that Frank made to help the company. After Salerno left, Jimmy asked Frank to stay in his house because he didn't want Frank's name to be listed in any of the hotels in Chicago. The relations between Frank and Jimmy got closer after the business in Chicago. They often went to the park with their family while talking about business. Frank began to find out that the pension fund money from workers in the union was used by Jimmy as a loan to the mafia with large interest. This loan business was handled by one of Jimmy's men named Alan. He got 10% off the deal. Most of the loan money from Jimmy was used by the mafia in the gambling business, and in fact, Las Vegas could become like now thanks to Jimmy's fund. Jimmy had so much money, even his wife got enough money to buy 22% of land in Florida. Even crazier, she also got her own skiing club, complete with its own snow mountain. One of the borrowers of Jimmy's fund was Sam Giancana, a businessman who is a close friend of the Kennedy family, one of the presidents of America. It was easy for Kennedy to run for president thanks to the loan from the mafia. John F. Kennedy also had an agreement to help the American mafia to take Fidel Castro's control over some businesses in Cuba. Jimmy was not happy with John F. Kennedy running for president because he knew that his business will be in danger. He can no longer make calls for his legal business. The Kennedy family found out about Jimmy's pension fund loans. Moreover, someone from the Kennedy family took part in working with Jimmy in the union. This made Jimmy so angry that he scolded all of his staff, including Frank. Frank was offended, but Jimmy immediately apologized to him. After his appointment as president, John F. Kennedy appointed his younger brother, Robert Kennedy, to become Attorney General. That set problems for Jimmy's business. Frank told everything to Russell about what happened to Jimmy. Hearing that, Russell promised to persuade JFK's father, Joseph Kennedy, to remind him of the one that helped his son to run for president. Frank was then tasked to deliver weapons that the mafia would use to get rid of Fidel Castro in Cuba. Frank drove the truck to Florida. It turned out that the Americans' attempt failed miserably. They lost badly against Fidel Castro. That loss was one of the most embarrassing incidents that happened to America. Thanks to that, JFK started getting a bad reputation. To make things right, Robert suggested they started to bring down Jimmy's illegal business to help JFK clear his name. Robert, who already knew that Jimmy has given $500,000 from workers' pensions to Nixon, America's presidential candidate who failed against JFK, decided to target them first. On one occasion, Jimmy and Frank went to the workers' meeting. The workers started to worry about their retirement money at the union. Jimmy was a little disturbed by the representative of the union, Tony Provenzano. Tony sold his name to the people to secure his position in the eyes of workers who were starting to worry about their pensions. Tony was the head of the branch in New Jersey. Tony and Jimmy once grew up together. Although it wasn't for too long. Tony was known to be so cruel that he once ordered somebody to kill his potential competitors and put their bodies in a crushing machine. Tony's arrogance made Jimmy feel scared. Every mistake that Tony made would be borne by Jimmy at trial. Jimmy intended to give his deputy to Frank to replace Tony. Jimmy persuaded Frank to do it for his family. Finally, Frank agreed to do it. For the first time, Frank got a such high award from a friend. He was promoted to become the president of the union as Jimmy's representative, while Jimmy continued to undergo trials. Jimmy's nightmares started coming at him. One day, during his trial, someone attempted to murder him, but thankfully, the man failed. Since then, Jimmy was always escorted at the trial. Jimmy's group also began to investigate the witnesses and reporters who were attending the trial. They investigated every background and every mistake they had ever committed and blackmailed the witnesses and reporters to withdraw their report. One time, while enjoying coffee, Jimmy and Russell heard the news of the shooting of JFK, which ended up killing him. Jimmy was very happy to hear the news because Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General who was the younger brother of John F. Kennedy, could no longer have the strength to fight Jimmy. Jimmy was so happy he forbade mourning the president's death at the labor union office, but even though JFK was dead, the jury's decision was unanimous. Jimmy had to be imprisoned for 5 years while the union's lending activities continued from behind iron bars. Jimmy had prepared everything by giving an order to Fitz, his confidant. Fitz became a substitute for the temporary president of the union while Russell, who didn't like Allen, always hindered the application for loans for the mafia, even though Fitz, the interim president, had agreed to it. Russell asked Frank to give a little lesson to Allen so that he knew his mistake. The next day, Frank bombarded Allen with gunshots to make sure he learned his lesson. Since then, Allen never made the same mistake of hindering the loan from the union. Meanwhile, Tony was arrested by the FBI and sent to the same jail where Jimmy was jailed. Tony was jailed for 7 years. While eating at the prison's cafeteria, Tony came to Jimmy to ask about his retirement money worth $1.2 million that had disappeared, while Jimmy's pension fund, which was a higher amount, was still there. Both of them were jailed, but different from Tony, Jimmy's money was not disappeared. Jimmy told Tony that their case was different, so the treatments were also different. Tony was arrested for extortion while Jimmy was arrested for just a fraud case. Tony couldn't accept that his money was the only one that was missing. They got into an argument that ended up in a fight. Russell told Frank about another mafia called Crazy Joe Gallo. Both Joe and Russell were Italians, but Russell didn't like him a bit. Joe's bad temperament and disrespectful manner made Russell disgusted. He didn't even hesitate to kill fellow Italians to get what he wanted. On one occasion, when it was Russell's birthday, Joe made fun of Russell and made Frank immediately drag him away. He then said that both Joe and Russell were mobsters and that they shouldn't be making fun of each other. Despite that, Joe didn't care and thought that all the other mafias were below him. He then left with a mocking look. Frank backed to his table to Russell, who was sitting by himself. From the look in Russell's eyes, Frank knew what to do. When Joy, his wife, and his children were eating at a restaurant, Frank suddenly showed up and shot Joe dead right in front of his wife and children. The next day, Frank watched the news of Joe's murder while having breakfast. Peggy realized that it was all his father's doing. After years of serving his time in prison, finally, President Nixon was elected. He still remembered when Jimmy gave him $500,000 for his candidacy. He immediately arranged parole for Jimmy. Finally, Jimmy could feel freedom again, but unfortunately, the union has been controlled completely by Fitz. Seeing that made Jimmy determined to reclaim the union, but Jimmy's problem with Tony in jail made it difficult for him to win his position back in the union, until at a meeting in Florida when Jimmy and Anthony met once again. Just like when they were in prison, they started arguing, which led to a fight. On the way home, Jimmy asked Frank to help him get Russell's permission to kill Tony. Frank explained that it was quite difficult to do. He felt that it would be too hard for Jimmy to fight for the chair in the labor union again. Frank then tried to find a way out with Russell, but most of the mafia advised Jimmy not to do it with violence. Meanwhile, Jimmy seemed to be running out of patience. He began acting aggressively. He used the media to tarnish Fitz and Tony's reputation. The Cold War between them finally began. Fitz, who was attacked by the media after what Jimmy said about him, decided to respond. He deliberately blew up Jimmy's friend's boat. Jimmy responded by planting an explosion in Fitz's son's car so that he would stop promoting his son as a replacement candidate for one of the union's branch offices. Fitz then fired Jimmy's wife from a branch office of the union. Jimmy was getting emotional and finally cooling in the media, saying that Fitz lent pension money from the union to the mafia to finance their illegal business in many places in return for high interest. Salerno, one of the big mafias who often borrowed money from the union, was disappointed with what Jimmy had said to the media. His words could harm the mafia. Jimmy also had the potential to become an enemy of the mafia. Salerno then asked Frank to advise Jimmy to stop what he was doing because it could harm everyone. After all, Frank, Salerno, and Russell discussed the best way out of the problem. He conveyed a message from Salerno and told Jimmy to just get his pension and live quietly with his grandson, but Jimmy refused to retire. He rejected the suggestion. He still insisted on taking back the leadership of the union for the sake of his pride. Frank got a dilemma. Jimmy was his friend, but his action by telling the truth to the media, and Jimmy's stubbornness to take back the position of chairman of the union by exposing secrets related to the mafia were really regrettable. Frank realized that the mafia would start chasing Jimmy because they were afraid that their illegal business would be discovered. Sadly, not only Jimmy, but Frank also got into trouble with other mafias because they knew Frank was Jimmy's close friend. Russell once again tried to mediate the problem. He held a big gathering party between the mafia so Jimmy could open his eyes. The union was not only about himself, but also about the survival of all the mafia who depend on the union's funding in their business. Salerno reported to Russell that Jimmy prevented many loans from being disbursed and used his influence to hold donors from handing over their money to the union so that many applications could not be disbursed. It had a bad impact on the mafias. There is a possibility that there will be a war between mafias fighting over loans from the union. Russell began to think hard about finding a solution. There was only one way, namely to persuade Jimmy to cooperate so that he didn't alone problems in the struggle for taking the leadership of the union. That night, Russell tried to talk to Jimmy and persuaded him as a friend. Russell said that the mafia had been warning him about Jimmy's action for involving in the funding, but Jimmy insisted on his action. He even said that if the mafias wanted to get funding from the union, they had to help him get back his leadership. Russell and Frank were in a dilemma. Finally, Russell had to take the last resort. Russell arranged a plan for Jimmy that day. Russell gave the award ring to Frank, the same ring as the one that Russell wore. A sense of identity for the new ruler of the mafia so that no one can touch Frank. Russell explained to Frank that the situation was out of control. Their friend Jimmy had gone too far to endanger everyone, including Russell himself. He asked Frank one more time to talk to Jimmy. No matter what, Jimmy's action must be stopped. Frank once again advised Jimmy to stop everything or they would kill him to stop him. Somehow, Jimmy didn't budge. He said that he had all the legal evidence files of the mafia he had a transaction with, including the records of their transaction. He threatened to spill everything to the media if the mafia tried to harm him. After thinking about everything, a few days later, Russell made a decision. He asked Frank to immediately fly to Detroit. Russell had arranged a meeting for Frank and Jimmy. Hearing that, Frank knew that he was tasked to eliminate Jimmy. Everyone's decision has been taken. Frank realized what he would do to Jimmy would hurt his family because they were a close friend, but in order to save his own family, Frank inevitably had to follow orders from Russell. Frank flew by plane to Detroit. All the way through the trip, Frank kept contemplating his mission. He was very sad that all this had to happen to him and Jimmy. After he arrived in Detroit, he then waited for Jimmy's son to pick up him and Sally, another confidant of Tony, to meet Jimmy himself. After Jimmy's son picked them both up, they went to pick up Jimmy at his house. Arriving at the destination, Frank went with Jimmy and entered the house but found nobody inside. Jimmy was very annoyed. When he was getting ready to leave, Frank immediately took a gun from his jacket and shot Jimmy dead. After that, Frank immediately returned to report everything to Russell, saying that he had succeeded in killing him. Meanwhile, Sally and Tony took Jimmy's body and then cremated it. The evidence of Jimmy's murder had disappeared and no one knew what happened to him. Jimmy's death didn't change everything, things instead got worse. Problems arose here and there. Sally killed all of Tony's competitors because Tony didn't want anyone to endanger his position. Russell couldn't let that happen. He immediately sent Frank to kill Sally.
They just forgot to tell somebody else.
After that, several mafias set up a trap for Russell. The FBI arrested both Russell and Frank, but the evidence of Frank's involvement had been destroyed by Russell. Frank was only indicted for blowing up a factory. Frank's valuable assets were also confiscated because it was a gift from Jimmy. It was done to lighten his sentence. After they were jailed, Salerno suffered from prostate cancer. Russell had a stroke, while Frank himself was suffering from arthritis. This was when Russell started regretting his decision. They should have defended Jimmy and gotten rid of Tony instead, but everything had happened. Russell had to bear that feeling of regret until finally, he died while undergoing treatment. Frank was finally free, but he was too old to do his old job. His life only relied on drugs. Peggy, his daughter, who already knew everything, hated Frank. She refused to meet him. Frank really regretted all he had done. The next day, Frank went to the coffin dealer and ordered a coffin for himself. He also paid for the funeral for himself. He realized that his time was near. Everyone he knew was gone one by one. He was the only one left. Frank decided to confess everything to a pastor. All the murders he had committed and every illegal business he had. His secret was never been discovered. All of those involved kept everything secret until they died.